Harrup Kaur, and July 30th, 2015. I was 9 years old. I was in Vancouver, living with my parents and younger sister and brother. So I remember actually first hearing about it, but I just know in general, seeing the, hearing mainly from the grown-ups in the community, and then slowly starting to see stuff coming on the television. So the main thing we saw was just the utter shock and pain on the faces of the grown-ups in the community. And it was all encompassing, because it wasn't just, it was like the whole community, as all the grown-ups in the community were affected. And just to be surrounded by all of that pain and, you know, disbelief on what could have happened and that it happened. I remember seeing on the television one of our, just seeing, you know, the aunties and uncles that I would see usually at Gurdwara, and they were on TV crying, you know, and they were being interviewed in their home, and I'm like, this is the sofa that we used to play hide and seek behind, and now here's Auntie, you know, just in tears, you know, about what had happened. And just to have it happen to all the grown-ups at once and to see that was just, you know, really overwhelming. Yeah, so that's the other thing I remember, is just all the ardasas that were being done. So at Gurdwara and at Kirtans, just all the ardas and prayers for what was, for the unknown, we didn't know, and what was going on. I really think around that time in 1984, I don't think I was aware of what it was. I don't think we had those discussions. It was more at home, was just that the sanctity of the Bar Sahib had been violated, you know, that, you know, we don't think about, you know, somebody even walking into our house with shoes, because we have a Guru Granth Sahib Ji at home, and to think about soldiers coming in with you know, with their shoes, and tanks coming in, you know. I think in the following years is when I learned more about the political background and what it signified, but I think at that point it was first of all just the emotions, you know, mirroring what was going on with the grown-ups, with just the pain and shock, because I had been to the Bar Sahib, and to think of what could have happened there. But then that really got overwhelmed just with anger about, you know, how could this have happened there? And I really feel that that anger affected so much of that time period of my childhood. I remember we went to the Bar Sahib a few years later, and first of all, we couldn't even go to India for a while because we were just so unsure about it being safe. And we went to the Bar Sahib, and there was a police barricade in front. And just to see the police up front and see a guy wearing boots sitting on the trunk of his Jeep, and I was just so angry. He's holding his rifle, and I just wanted to grab that rifle and hit him. I'm like, how dare you stand here in front of the Bar Sahib after everything that happened? And we like washed, you know, you walk through the bani, and your feet go through that trickling water, and you're going up the marble steps, and you're like just wiping the hands and matha taking as you go up. And then suddenly you pick up your face, and the wind blows, the cool wind, and I didn't realize I had been crying, you know. And you hear that beautiful sound from the sarovar coming across the Sarovar Kirtan, and see the sarovar, and then you just think about what it was like, you know, in June. And it's kind of silly because I wasn't there at that time, but I really feel like the experience of the Bant, you know, of that became the experience of the whole Bant, that we all felt that pain of what happened there. So then it was much more a personal story, because my dad's family was in, their Pind was outside of Amritsar, and my mother's family was in Delhi. And so just hearing about what was going on with the family. So my Chacha Ji got beat up quite a bit. He was the only one in the family who'd wear Kesari, the star. And so he got beat up, and I just remember hearing about that the ground, a crevice was made in the ground because he was beat up so badly and shot in the thigh and the knee. And then our family in Delhi, that they stayed locked up in their house because of everything that was going on outside. And fortunately, none of them were hurt, but just the horrors that they lived through, and that they couldn't go out and help what the voices and stuff they were hearing going on outside. But again, I don't think politically, being 9 years old was a discussion that came up. I think one thing that really stood out for me was how the whole community came together. It was, I remember we had a very big march, and years later I found out it was one of the biggest marches outside of, I think there's one in the UK, and this one in Vancouver was one of the biggest ones that went on. And it started off, I think, in the Vancouver Art Gallery, marched all the way to, I think it's the consulate, maybe Indian consulate. And just seeing the sea of orange, you know, the stars and chutneys, of everybody marching, everybody shouting and chanting and just like expressing our pain and also demanding justice. And I remember at 9 years old, I grabbed the megaphone and was also shouting alongside that. But just seeing that all these different groups in the community that we used to see before, like you go to this Kirtan group and that Kirtan group, but everybody got together. So it didn't matter if you were Amritari or Gesatari or not, it just all of us felt that together and that we really got together. And I think that's something that really stayed with me later on, that the thought of that the community can unite and that we can do stuff when we're together. And so in undergrad also, I got together with 4 other youth that each came from different groups, even though, we don't like to think we come from a different group, but we kind of came from different groups within the community, and we got together and started a Sikh youth camp that's been going on since then. So that kind of was, I think, one thing that really stood out for me is that the importance of us being together and the power we have when we are united together. In the following years, that's something that for sure just really affected my whole education of my place in the world. I remember I couldn't even say the word India for so many years afterwards, because just saying that word was so painful, and it's so hard because that's how people identify you, like you're a Canadian Indian, but that word was just so hard to even say. And I think in the early 1990s, I got together with some youth in Vancouver, and by then, of course, we were aware of what this represented for us politically, and we actually organized a candlelight vigil at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and we put up, a big screen and showed slides of what had happened, and got people from all over the community, did kirtan there together, got other communities like the Dalit community come and talk about human rights violations against them. And since then, that candlelight vigil has gone on every year and still has continued. And I left Vancouver many years ago. But when I hear about it's going on and who's doing it now, I'm like, these youth weren't even born at that time, and that they're continuing on this tradition. It just really emphasizes for me how this really impacted. It was part of our history now,
Absolutely.
And then also the fact that we still have to talk about it. I mean, within the context of that justice has still not been served, this many years later. So I think first of all, just the justice being served in general. So that's from the point of view of the Indian government, that justice has just not been served. That's just, and all the details of that, what that means. But I also think it's really important for us as a community to educate our youth, which, as I alluded to before, I think we have done a good job, but just for us to make sure that we keep that up. And I still too often hear people say, that was in '84, it's okay, forget about it. We don't need to talk about it now. It's so much better now. We don't need to talk about it. And for me, that's so insulting to what happened then and to the people who died then to say that we should just brush it under the rug. It doesn't mean that we're actively necessarily fighting for anything right now. If you just acknowledge what happened and remember what happened, I think for me that's a very important issue for us as a community to educate ourselves and not be afraid of speaking about it, So my son's actually 9, so the same age I was in 1984, and my youngest is 6.
And do they have any inkling of what went on in '84?
Oh yes, for sure. So we've taken them only for the last 2 years. Our younger son we've explained to not too much because it's hard for him to understand those concepts, but our older son for sure we've discussed with him often so he understands. And they've gone to the 1984 Remembrance Marches for the last 2 years that are held in San Francisco. The main thing is they just don't understand the concept of how would a government attack their own people. They just feel so safe here. They just love being part of America. And I'm Canadian, so I always talk about being Canadian, and they just, love it, and are so proud. They have their pledge, they do the pledge to the flag every morning at school, and I think that was the biggest thing for them to understand, that how could a government attack their own people, so that they can continue to engage, I think, the world community, so that we can work together to make sure that justice is served. And then not forget about the people that were hurt during that time, so that, for example, the wonderful work that's been done for the widows and the widow colony, and just remember that there are people who still were affected and that need help. And then to never be afraid of speaking about what happens. And I don't think, for me, it's not just about 84, but in general, what it represents for them as 6, that they should always be willing to stand up when injustice, and even when it's uncomfortable to speak up, and especially when it's uncomfortable to speak up, because that's when less people are going to be speaking up, that they should be willing to stand up and speak.